Here. Okay.
Boker Tov.
Tov, good morning on this very sunny day. We have to. Today is the yard site of our matriarch Rachel, Rachel. I just saw pictures of hundreds of people going to her resting place to pray. And so maybe we'll have a few minutes to talk about Rachel, our matriarch. One of my favorite characters in the Bible stories. I love her. I love her whole persona. Rachel, you know, she's the only one of the patriarchs that's buried on the edge of the land of Israel, not in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. She's buried in Beit Lechem. Why? When she passed away, good morning, Ashley.
Morning.
She said, I want to be buried in a place. You know, she died young in childbirth, giving birth to her son Benjamin, where when the people of Israel have to leave the land of Israel exiled, they will be able to pass me by and pray and get comfort from me. So, Keva Rachel, Mama Rachel, as we call her, has always been to us, I see, as a person that you could go to, and there's where you cry your heart out. This is, you could get to feel her compassion, her love, and her warmth. So we'll talk more a little later about Rachel, but today is her yard site. So it's a day of giving a little extra tzedakah and a little prayer, and perhaps tap into a little bit about what she represented, not only as a matriarch of the people, but as a person who offered compassion, warmth, love, prayer for her people, for all of us. There's a very beautiful medrash that there was a terrible decree against the Jewish people. So the Rebbes called out to God, who can we send as an emissary to pray on our behalf? They said, Moses, we'll send Moses. They sent Moses and God refused to listen. And it went through, they sent Aaron, they sent Maimonides. Finally, they sent Rachel, our matriarch, and God said to her, I'm going to listen. Because she sacrificed for her family, for her children. When she was supposed to marry Jacob and she saw her older sister's pain, she gave her the special symbols, the special signs to let Jacob know that it was her. And that's why he ended up marrying Leah first, because of her compassion and love for her older sister, even though this was her basheret. And she got to marry him later, but still, you know, so just seeing her, a whole approach to life as one, what can I do for others, is something we could all emulate, especially in our times. So Mama Rachel, pray for us. We need you. One of my children is Rachel, by the way. And it's funny how the name reflects a person, because I see in her like the qualities of Rachel. Like she's very refined and it just has a certain sophistication and refinement that I always think that's what the matriarch Rachel must have been like very kind, refined, compassionate, loving, beautiful, all those qualities. So now there's a story written in the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe's diary that he writes that his father, the fifth Chabad Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber of Lubavitch, when he read this week's Torah portion, the opening lines of God's first conversation with the first Jew, Abraham, and Sarah, his wife, he cried. He cried, he shed tears. And you wonder, what is it in this first conversation that God has with Abraham and Sarah that made him cry? It happened over 4,000 years ago, the story. And I think, and this is what we're going to discuss today, is what the Rebbe saw in this conversation, in these words, is not only a conversation to Abraham and Sarah, but it is a conversation and a directive to each and every one of us. Our mission, our purpose, our focus. Good morning, Irene. Our focus, good morning, Ashley. Our focus in life. And that's why he got so emotional. And what was this? What was this conversation all about? What does it mean? So let's open up, and I'm going to read the opening words of the Chumash because it's always so beautiful. Vayomer Hashem al Avram, and God said to Avram, Lech lecha, go for you, or go to you. Listen to the language. Me'artzecha, from your land, mimoladecha, from the place of your birth, umibeis avicha, and from the home of your parents, el haaretz asher ar'echa, to the land that I will show you. Notice God doesn't tell him the destination. Should he pack for 1 week? Should he pack for 4 months? Should he pack winter clothes, summer clothes, skiing outfit? Who knows, right? And then God says to him, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing and be blessed. So first of all, let's dig in a little bit into the language God uses. Anybody want to ask any questions or wonder about the language? When you want to tell somebody to go somewhere, you say, Lech, go. Why does God say, Lech lecha, go to you? What does it mean, go to you? It's improper way to speak, go to you. Go to you, what does that even mean? And then God is telling Abraham to leave his country, leave his birthplace, leave the home of his parents. Why repetition? Why the emphasis on leaving the country, leaving your birthplace, leaving the home of the parents? Isn't it obvious if you leave the United States of America, you're leaving your birthplace, you're leaving the home of your parents, right? So you'll say, well, God wanted to emphasize to him, you are truly leaving Abraham and Sarah. You could say that's the reason. If so, the plot thickens. It's the incorrect order. If you want to tell somebody to leave and you want to emphasize, what do you say? You know, leave your parents' home, leave your birthplace, leave your country. The order should be reversed. If you want to emphasize how the person should leave, or you want to say, you know, you're really going to leave. You're not only going to leave your parents, you're going to leave your birthplace, you leave the country, you ready? Go. Why doesn't he tell him where he's going? So does anybody want to offer any insights on any of these questions? Go ahead, don't be shy.
Because he should have faith if God is telling him to leave and lead, that it doesn't matter where it is that he should be going or for how long. He's got to take the responsibility and leadership and go.
He's saying it's a leap of faith.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Anybody else want to answer a question, ask a question? So we'll start with that, being Carrie started with that. So it is the third test, actually, that God gives Abraham and Sarah. There were 10 tests. The first is when he denies idolatry and gets thrown into the furnace by the people of Haran, where he lived, in Mesopotamia, Iraq. And the third test is the test where God says, go, and he doesn't say, well, where should I go? He goes. He follows the directive without questioning where he's going. Of course, the 10 tests, and Avram and Sarah, they pass all the 10 tests. So that's the answer to that question. So now let's go back to part 1. Lech lecha, go to you. What does it mean, go to you? So Rashi, the classic commentary, jumps in right away and says, it means for your benefit. God is saying, go to you, go for your benefit by leaving Mesopotamia and going, which ends up to be Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land of Israel. You will benefit. And we see he benefits. He's wealthy, he becomes famous, and a whole nation comes out of Abraham and Sarah. Good morning, Chani. Good morning, Margaret. Go for your benefit. Deeper to Lech lecha. Go to you. If you want to see who you truly are, if you want to find your deepest self, if you want to uncover and discover yourself, who you are, you have to go on this journey. And perhaps now we're beginning to unravel why the Rebbe cried, because of the conversation God is telling Abraham. You sometimes, not sometimes, always, if you want to discover who you are, your deepest self, you have to go forth on a journey. You have to journey forth to your promised land. And you have to leave Mesopotamia and Iraq. If you want to discover who you are, not who someone else is. There's a beautiful story of a guy, a great Rebbe called Reb Zusha of Anapol, a beloved, beloved leader, a scholar. But he was among the simple Jews. He never put himself on a podium somewhere. He says, I'm not scared that after 120 years, when I pass away, that God will say to me, Zushalem, why weren't you as great as Maimonides? Why weren't you as great as Moses? Why weren't you as great as Aaron the high priest? He says, you know what I'm scared they're going to ask me? Zusha, how come you weren't Zusha? How come you didn't do all you could do to be who you are? Tap into your energy, your talents, your spark. Sometimes we look to be somebody else or like somebody else, but the truth is, Lech Lecha, our journeys have to be to find ourselves, who we are. So this is what God is telling Avram Sarah. You want to find out who you truly are. You want to be the best version of yourself. You have to leave Mesopotamia, where he lived, Iraq, and you have to Haran, the city, you have to travel forth. So now let's see why the terminology, leave your country, leave your birthplace, leave the home of your parents. First of all, does anybody have any question about the first part, the Lech Lecha? Or you want to add something or say something? So this now is a very, very interesting insight. Leave your country, leave your birthplace, leave the home of your parents. There are three things. Obviously, it's not only a geographic directive to Avram and Sarah. It's an emotional, psychological, intellectual directive. There are three things, says Hasidus, Jewish mysticism, and Torah, that impact our lives. One, our country, society. The influences of society dictates our lives. We can all relate to it very well now. The political views of others, the ethics and values and morals of the government or society dictates to us. We can very well relate that society dictates things to us, and that influences how we act, how we behave, how we dress, how we speak. We want to be cool. We all relate to that very, very much. Some of us are more influenced, some are less influenced, but society, Artsacha, is a strong influence in our lives. The second thing that influences us, good morning, Dr. Schulman. Then the second thing that influences us is our parents' home, our birthplace. What our parents tell us. Your parents have prejudice, you're going to inherit sometimes the prejudice. Your parents are atheists, you'll be an atheist. My mother doesn't believe in God, my father doesn't believe in God, therefore I don't believe in God. My mother hates chili, my father hates chili, we're not allowed to have chili in the house. Even silly things. So the second thing that influences our lives is how we grew up in our homes. What our parents, the relationships we see, how our parents related, maybe that's how we will relate in our future lives. for good or for bad. And the last thing that influences us is genetics, the home of our father, the Beis Avicha. Our mother and father, they give us genetic traits. You have blue eyes, you have blonde hair, you have a mean streak, you're compassionate, you're giving, you're kind, you're aggressive. What do you mean? It's genetics. I was born this way. So God says to Avram, and to each and every one of us, actually, you want to journey forth in your life, you have to abandon the negative influences of society, of your home, your birthplace, and your genetic disposition. If you want to truly be the best version of yourself and accomplish everything you can accomplish in your life, you have to leave these 3 things behind. You have to emotionally disconnect, psychologically disconnect, and sometimes intellectually we have to disconnect. Remember, Abraham grew up in a society of idolatry. His own father had the largest idol company. The largest company of idols was Avram's father Terach, huge business. And remember the story, the famous story, that Avram was left to mind the shop. And he did no business because everyone came in to buy an idol that day. He discouraged them. He says, why do you want to buy a piece of stone? Really? Well, you know, I'm ill. I need a cure. You need a cure? Go to a doctor. How could a piece of stone cure you? And his father comes back and he sees the entire shop of idols, the entire stock has been destroyed, except for one giant idol, one giant statue holding a hammer. So he says to Avram, what happened here? Avram says, Dad, I really don't know what happened here. What I think happened was a lady came in to buy an idol, and you see the guy there, he got jealous, and in a fit of rage, he destroyed all the idols in the shop. So his father says, Avram, stop mocking me. An idol can't move. An idol can't speak. An idol can't hear or see. How can I believe you that this idol destroyed the others? He said to his father, exactly. How could you worship something that is a piece of stone? So Avram really goes against the tide of everything in his country, in his society. He's one against everybody. And then he's arrested because word gets out there's one man going against the tide. He's going to destroy our philosophy, our religion, our gods. So they throw him into a furnace because he refuses to renege on his ideology that there's one God and only one God that can't be seen and can't be proven that there's a God in a sense. And when they open up the furnace to take out the ashes, he's walking in the flames. So they realize right away, Nimrod, the king, realizes right away there's something very unusual going on. So here's a man, one man, and his wife Sarai, who go against the entire philosophy, society, political views, moral and ethical views of the entire nation of Haran. It's insane. How does he have the courage to do this? So this is what God tells him and tells all of us. You have to at times go against the tide. And that's why, by the way, a fish that's not alive can only be carried through with the tide. But a fish that's alive can swim against the tide. If you're alive, you can swim against the tide. But if you lack conviction and you lack courage, inner courage to do what you know is right and good, you can't swim against the tide. It's too difficult. You have to be alive to swim against the tide. And one more interesting insight about leaving your country, leaving your sometimes the trauma or abuse of your parents or whatever the influence of parents and genetics is, look at three of the greatest Jewish thinkers in the past generations. Karl Marx, Jew, Benedict Spinoza, or as his Hebrew name was Baruch, did you know that? Baruch Spinoza. And Sigmund Freud, Schleimer Freud. Sigmund's Hebrew name was Schleimer, although he didn't want to be reminded of it. Neither did Baruch Spinoza. Three of our greatest thinkers, whether we agree with their philosophy or not, we're not going to discuss now, were Jews. What was Karl Marx? Socialism, right? He fought the class wars. At that time, people were defined by property, by class. You had a lot of property, a lot of money, higher class. No money, lower class. Artsacha, land, country. Leave behind the ideology of a Karl Marx, because as we saw, it didn't work. Socialism didn't work and doesn't work. But one of the big kibbutz movements were based originally, when they settled into Israel, was based on the Karl Marx theory of socialism. We all share, we all live together, and everything is shared equally. Then you have a guy, Sigmund Freud. What did he say? Once you're born into a family, it's all over. That's it. You're born, it's over. Influence of parents. Everyone, he says, is traumatized by their parents, traumatized by their birth. It's over. And lastly, Spinoza, what was his big thing? Genetics. If you have a genetic disposition, you can't change it. Well, you're born with a trait, too bad. That's the fault. It's not your fault. You're born this way. But we see God is telling Abram and telling us, yes, you're born with genetics, but you can change it. You can leave behind the negative traits. You cannot say, I was born this way, I'll always be this way. We can work on ourselves, refine ourselves. If you see a negative trait within yourself, you can leave it behind. We're not saying it's easy, but God is saying, leave your home of your parents, Beis Avicha. Leave your birthplace, influence of your family life, and leave behind country, society's influences, and go forth to the land that I will show you. This is the conversation that God has with Abram and Sarah, and this is the conversation that God has with each and every one of us for all eternity. This is the conversation. This, in this Torah portion, is the synopsis, the mission, the direction to each and every one of us, that we have a journey. And sometimes we don't know where we're going to end up. The land I will show you. Where is your promised land? We're not talking about that we're all going to end up in the land of Israel, but we're metaphorically speaking. Where is your journey going to take you? And can you leave society's influences and sometimes things from parents that weren't exactly the best for you? And your genetic traits sometimes. There was a guy who said, I'm extremely generous. I said, why? He says, because my parents, every penny, they wouldn't let a penny out of the house. So I decided I'm going to be overly generous, he said. So this is the story of Abram and Sarah, but it's really our story. Because the reason they are the matriarchs and the patriarchs is not, why wasn't Noah, by the way, Noah and Naamah, who survived the flood, why are they not the first matriarch and patriarch? Anybody have an insight?
Were they Jewish?
Well, no one was Jewish yet. No one was Jewish yet.
Nothing, I'm talking.
And also interesting, Margaret, why are Abram and Sarah called the first Jews? Ivri. Why not Noah and his wife? They also followed God's directive. They built the ark and they repopulated the world. Shouldn't they have been the first matriarch and patriarch? Anybody want to share an insight, an idea? We'll give a hint. Who was on the ark with Noah? Who remembers? Who survived the flood with Noah and his wife?
His children.
His children. Anyone else? Any neighbors, any politicians, any doctors, lawyers?
Only his family.
Only his family. What does that tell you?
That he didn't reach out to others to encourage others to come on. He wasn't, he was a leader where he believed in Hashem, but he didn't encourage others to come with him.
Excellent, exactly. 120 years he's building an ark, right? People are coming over saying, what are you doing? You know, there's going to be a flood if we don't correct our ways. He wasn't able to encourage or transform even one person in society. He didn't have that kind of leadership qualities. Look what it says about Avram. I want to just read this to you, okay? Avram is leaving. Vayikach Avram es Sarai Ishtai. He takes his wife, and Lot ben Achiv, his nephew, the Eskol Rechushim, and all of his wealth. Asher asa b'charam. The Es HaNefesh Asher asu b'charam. What does it mean? And the souls he made in Charan. So Rashi says, hundreds of people followed Abraham. He had a whole entourage leave with him. People that realized that the way of monotheism, belief in one God, is the way to go. So they leave Haran with Avram. Avram is a leader. What is a leader? He makes other leaders. He transforms people's lives. He's not a leader because, oh, he has a whole group of people at his beck and call and do whatever he says. But he has other people who not only believe in monotheism like him, but they encourage others to believe in monotheism. So an example or a definition of a true leader is one who makes other leaders. That's the sign of a true leader. Not a leader who tells his people you have to follow. You're my
So what I want to say is,
Go
all
ahead.
these mayors, I was saying to someone who did such a good job in New York, like Bloomberg and Giuliani, they weren't good leaders because they didn't groom the next generation to take over for them. And that is something that we should all live by. President Trump, I feel like he's grooming someone behind him, and that is a sign of a good leader.
Okay. So that's what they said, that the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who sent out thousands of emissaries all over the world, everyone is a leader in their community and is making leaders. So
I
true
don't think
leadership,
Trump
and
is
even
true
also, you know,
leader.
even, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just think we should leave politics out of it because
Yes, please. And we,
I don't agree. So
You know,
I don't- I-
also in parenting, you know, what's in parenting, one of the greatest gifts you can give your children is independence, which means in a sense leadership. Not that every time they have to make a decision, they call mommy and tati because they were never given tools to become independent. So leadership is creating leaders, creating people who think by themselves. You don't want a cult following. You want people who are independent thinkers. Those will be true leaders. Because they'll say, oh, why do you believe in one God? Oh, woman, I got to go ask Avram and Sarai. Hold on. But they themselves began to understand, and therefore they were influencers. Influencers who make influencers. So that explains a little bit why Avram and Sarah are the first matriarch and patriarch. Because
Excuse me.
somebody wants to say something?
Yes, I heard an interpretation that it was Abraham because he challenged God, and Noah did not. He first said after the flood, Hashem, why did you do this? And he said, why are you telling me now? You should have challenged me before I did it. But Abraham had the courage to challenge God in Sodom and Gomorrah and so on.
I was going to say that. Very beautiful point. So those who don't know the story, if you remember when God tells Avram he's going to destroy Sodom, where his nephew is living, Avram right away jumps to the defense to try to save the people, even though they're known as corrupt individuals. So Abram immediately jumps to the defense of his people. Doesn't succeed because at the end of the day, God wants to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because they're a very corrupt nation. But that's a beautiful point, Dr. Schulman, that another sign of leadership is you fight for humanity, fight for your people. Like Moshe. Moshe is another example, even though he's not a patriarch, he's the giver of the Torah. But Moshe also, remember, he says to God, if you're going to destroy the people because of the sin of the golden calf, cut me out of your Torah, take me too. I refuse to be part of this. So that's a sign of true leadership.
Would you say that Adam also, that God might have wanted Adam to be the first Jew, but he also did not have those traits?
Obviously. Obviously it was meant Avram and Sarah were the ones who rose to the occasion. So they end up being the first matriarch and patriarch. It's a big responsibility that of Avram and Sarah. And if you could just imagine yourself also going against a whole nation of people who worship idolatry, it's not an easy feat to do that. It takes tremendous courage. And also, you read the story of Avram when he's a little boy is when he wakes up one day and he realizes there's something that created this world. First, he thinks it's the sun, then he thinks it's the moon, then he thinks it's the constellations, and then he realizes, you know what, it's none of them. It's something we cannot see. God is something we cannot see.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
During Rebecca's bat mitzvah on the top of Masada, we had a rabbi there who was talking about idolatry. And he said, even in the modern day, and he just said Elvis followers, people would follow him mindlessly. And it's present in our present day, not just then, I feel.
There's a very interesting medrash or insight from the Gemara. It's not a medrash. That idolatry was a very big challenge for the people of the generations. It wasn't so simple. Oh, don't worship idolatry. We see it keeps reenacting itself. The sin of the golden calf. They just got the Torah. They made themselves a golden calf to worship. So there was a special inclination to go for idolatry. So during the time of the temple, the Talmud tells that the rabbis saw, the rabbis, the leaders saw that this is a very strong Yetzer Hara inclination. So they prayed to God to take it away. So the Torah says God took it away and it got replaced with money. Now we worship money. Because tell me, who here has a little Buddha that you pray to every day? Who here, when you get a sore throat, you run to get the idol of healing, the idol of wealth, the idol of childbirth? You laugh. If I told you that I prayed every day to a sculpture, you'd say, oh, she needs a psychiatrist. It's such a foreign idea to us. But if I tell you that I sacrificed my life for money, you'd go, wow, she's courageous. So money has replaced our desire for idolatry in a sense. We all desire money. So before I move on to the next story, I want to share another interesting idea that just came to mind. We see one of the 10 commandments is, of course, belief in one God, and you shall not serve other gods, idolatry or other gods, It could be another person who you worship as a god. So why is God so adamant about not worshiping idolatry? I mean, is it really competition to God that we not worship idolatry? Does God really care? Does God really care if I bow down to a little stone figure every day? Why is God so adamant that absolutely not take a figure made out of stone, out of glass, a photo, and worship that as your God, as your idol?
That would be a form of avodah zarah.
Yeah, but why is God so adamant? It's in the 10 Commandments. It's, of course, one of the mitzvahs lo saseh, you shall not, it's forbidden. The answer is in Genesis, a beautiful insight I want to share. God says B'Tselem Elokim Nivra Ha'adam. Man and woman were created in my image. In my image. But what image is that? If God doesn't have an image, what image were we created in? What does it mean you're created in God's image? God doesn't have an image. Exactly. The reason God doesn't have an image is because God is God. But the reason God says you're created in my image is because no one can take you and say, you are A, B, and C, and you must be A, B, and C. Every person following Lech Lecha, you have to define what image are you going to be. No one is put into a box when they're born, and that's how you have to be, because that's how you have to be. You are created in God's image, which means you can make your image. You can make yourself who you want to be and who you should be. So that's why God negates idolatry, because you cannot be created in that image. You are created in my image. No one can define you. You have to define yourself, of course, with hopefully the directives of Torah and mitzvahs, the journey with God's wisdom. So that's why God negates idolatry, because idolatry negates that concept that we can be who we are and who we should be. That we don't worship a form, a predefined form. We don't worship also metaphorically that this is the way it has to be and that's the way it's meant to be. We are created in God's image. You're created in God's image means you can define and choose your path, and hopefully the path of God, of wisdom, of monotheism, of Torah, of mitzvahs. This is the whole idea of why idolatry is so foreign to us, because it actually puts us in a box. It doesn't allow us to be who we are, who are meant to be. Does anybody want to add anything, say something?
Yes, I think that the more we emulate Hashem's attributes, the more we begin to be in that image, the kindness, the forgiveness, the tzedakah. The more we do that, the more we become closer to what God's image should be on earth.
Exactly, but that's why mitzvah means connection. People define it as good deed, but really what it means is connect. You're connecting to your soul, to your God. Your soul is really who you are. God's image is the soul, the abstract, infinite part of you that's within you. So let's see what happens. Story time. So they leave Mesopotamia, which is Iraq, and they're traveling. Okay, they have a whole entourage, tremendous wealth. And an interesting tidbit I saw that when Avram was traveling with Sarai, he saw a culture of people who were indulgent in food, drink, and all kinds of materialistic pursuits. And he says to God, listen, I hope you're not settling me here because it's not exactly the culture that I would like. But when he enters into the land of Canaan, he sees something very interesting, the Medrash tells us. He sees people pruning and plowing, and then starting again, pruning and plowing. And he says to God, this is a place I'd like to settle. Land of Israel wasn't called that yet. So the question is, very quickly, we'll go past this until we move on to something what happens is, what did Avram see in the land of Israel, in the land of Canaan, that made him want to settle there? And first of all, also, the way we do things, first you plow and then you prune. You don't prune and then plow. You have nothing to prune if there's no plowing. So why does Avram say, I saw pruning and plowing, and now I want to settle here? And the answer is, again, it's not the physical pruning and plowing that he saw. It's the concept that you plant a garden, you create a life, you have children, you have maybe a business, friends, a lifestyle, and then you look at yourself and you evaluate, this is something that I really have to prune out of my life. This is something I have to get rid of in my life. I might have planted this, but I'm not going to reap what I sow. I see this is not necessarily positive. So you prune. And then what do? You go and you plow again. You plant a new garden and again you prune. So what Avram saw is a lifestyle of people that are never content with who they are. They prune that which was not good. Weeds, plants that are rotting away, plants that succeeded and give forth the right fruit. You prune it out and then you start again. So Avram saw a life of humanity that prunes and plows and prunes. A culture, society, people that are never status quo. We're good enough. Everything is perfect. But a way of life where you're always looking to improve, to prune and to plow and to prune. And when he saw that quality in the land of Israel, he said, this is where I want to settle. This is the kind of life I want to lead. Always growing, always achieving more spiritually, and so on. So he settles in the land of Israel. Everything is good and fine. And then comes the fourth test to Avram and Sarah. There's a tremendous famine. There's nothing to eat. There's poverty. There's really literally nothing to eat. Where can they find food? In the land of Egypt. So Avram and Sarah and Lot, their nephew, they pack their bags and they travel down to the land of Egypt. But there's a very big problem. Pharaoh, the king at the time, the Pharaoh, is known that if he spots a beautiful woman, he kills the husband and he takes them into the harem. That's what he does. That's his way of life. So if he brings Sarah, who's known to be beautiful, to the land of Egypt, what's going to happen? They're going to kill him and take her. So when they're about to come to the border, he says to Sarah, tell them that you're my sister. And this way, if we're brother, sister, I'm not a threat to them. I'm not a threat to them, so at least they won't kill me. And we'll survive. This is kind of a cryptic story. People always question. First of all, Avram tells Sarah, tell them you're my sister. Doesn't he care what's going to happen to her? Yeah, he'll survive, but she's going to be taken by Pharaoh. So what's going on over here? Anybody want to offer any insight to the story? And please, God, you told me to leave Mesopotamia, now you give me a famine, another test. So before I explain the whole story, I want to share with you one very, very important insight, which is really one of the rules. Math has rules, physics has rules. One of the basic rules in Torah is Maisa Avais, Simin Labanim. That whatever happens to the matriarchs and patriarchs is for all generations, which means the following: roadways, bridges, pathways. They were pioneers, they were explorers, they built bridges, they built roads through the jungle, they discovered countries, they opened up the waterways. So now, when we want to travel, we want to go, there are paved roads, there's signs, there's bridges, all because there were visionaries thousands of years ago who cleared the paths for us. You want to go to the African jungle to a safari, there's a road, there's a jeep. You don't have to take a machete and cut through to see the elephants. Maisa Avos Simin Labanim. The matriarchs and patriarchs were given challenges, trials, tribulations, pain, suffering. But they conquered, they overcame, they battled. Why? To reveal the energy, the Kabbalah explains, and the sparks in the universe that allow us, when faced with challenges and trials and tribulations in our lives, we just have to tap into that energy, the sparks, the roadways that they paved, and we too can conquer. We too can go forth because of the energy they placed into the world. So when we hear a story and what happens, it's not only a story, because God could have doctored it up. God could have made it look very nice and rosy. Yet the details of the story teach us what happened, how they overcame or how they dealt with it, even through pain, as we'll see in the coming weeks. But the sparks that they reveal, the energy by overcoming these challenges, are now in the universe for us to tap in when, God forbid, we need self-sacrifice. You know why the Jews were able to go into the gas chambers and call out, Ani Ma'amin, I believe in God, in spite of this terrible, horrible situation? Because there was an Avram and Sarah, a Jacob, Rebecca, Isaac and Rebecca, a Jacob, Leah and Rachel, who went through terrible situations and conquered and revealed and put that energy and the sparks and actualized it, so that when we are God forbid, come across, we're able to show self-sacrifice, we're able to march forth in triumph, even under horrible, terrible circumstances. That's why they're the matriarchs and the patriarchs, because they created that energy in the universe. They actualized that energy, rather. It was there. They actualized and revealed those sparks. This is the Kabbalah explains. Everything that happens is something that for the future will enable us to go over the bridge, cross the waterway, walk down the path in the jungle, because it's been cleared by them. So now let's go back to the story. So she gets taken by Paro, as they predicted. She says, no, he's my brother, no problem. And then when Paro tries to have relations with her and defile her, there's a plague. He can't perform. Not only he's plagued, his entire people are plagued. There's a huge plague breaks out, and everyone becomes dysfunctional physically. So Paro's no dummy. He's Paro. And he realizes there's something going on. This Sarah must be something special here. And he realizes who she is and who Avram is. And he says, go. I'm sorry I took you. He doesn't touch her. He never gets near her. And not only he releases them with tremendous wealth to pay them back for what he has done. And they leave back to Canaan with tremendous wealth once again. Now, fast forward, we know that many generations later, the Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt. And then how do they leave? With tremendous wealth. When God frees them from Paro of that generation, with the 10 plagues and so on, how do they leave? The Torah says with tremendous wealth. So again, this incident is kind of a foretell or premonition of what's going to happen generations later to the Jewish people. We will end up in Egypt like Avram and Sarah. We will be almost abused, and then we will leave with tremendous wealth. Now let's nitpick a little bit. First of all, Avram and Sarah saying their brother and sister wasn't a total lie, because they were first cousins. Avram married Sarai, his uncle's daughter. So it wasn't a lie, because in those days, and even nowadays, cousins are like brother and sister. So first of all, they didn't lie. Secondly, the commentaries say something very fascinating. When they were traveling to Egypt, Avram saw there was an angel accompanying Sarah. She had an angel on her right side protecting her. So when Avram saw the angel, remember he was a prophet, walking with Sarah, he knew that she will never be in danger from anybody, because no one will be able to touch her. So that's why he said, tell them I'm your brother, so at least I won't get killed. There's no angel walking with me. But he doesn't tell her he sees the angel. He just tells her, tell them you're my brother. So he wasn't callous. He knew that God would protect Sarah, would not let, and Sarai at that time, and would not let anything happen to her. And also, Avram understood very much the psychology of Paro's people and him. What murder they're allowed to do, and yet take the wife? Because the Egyptian people were against murder and adultery. They were against adultery. So that's why they would kill the husband, because murder is one sin. But every time you have intimacy with the woman, it's a sin each time, because she's a married lady. So in their crazy minds, killing once is better than every time committing adultery, because every time, if she's married and she has a husband somewhere, every time you have intimacy, it's an act of adultery. So in their crazy minds, one death is worth it, that they should have her free from her husband. So Avram understood the psychology of the Egyptians. So that's why he says, tell them that I'm your brother, because they definitely kill me. They're not going to care about murder. They're going to care more about adultery. So this is how the story unfolds, because that's what he knew, understood how they operate. He understood the mind of the Egyptian. And now, I love to share, and now comes the clincher, the Hasidic mysticism, the Kabbalistics behind the scenes story. So what really happens over here, based on Kabbalah, and based on the fact that we know that everything that Avram and Sarah do is something for us, for future generations. So now we're going to go Kabbalistic, okay? Not ballistic, Kabbalistic. This whole story is really also, it happened the way we said, of course, is an insight into our relationship. What happens with a husband and wife at times? There's a famine in the marriage. You feel a disconnect. You're hungry for passion. You're hungry for connection, but you're out of love sometimes. You fall out of love, or you feel a disconnect. And you wonder, should I stay married to the girl? Should I stay married to the guy? You feel a disconnect. You want to almost call it quits. So Avram says to Sarah, there's a famine. There's a famine. But let's not allow our marriage, let's not allow me to be killed, me to be taken away. In other words, let's not get divorced. Let's resort to being brother and sister at this time. What's a brother and a sister? A brother and a sister, you can't choose your relatives, as they say. You might be estranged from your brother or sister. You might be disconnected from your brother and sister. You might not see your brother and sister in 10 years. But your brother, you call your brother middle of the night, like I called my brother Baruch. I said, Baruch, I have a flat tire on Kingston Avenue. Could you come? He came running in the middle of the night to change my tire. There's a connection between a brother and a sister that always remains, because you're blood relatives. You came from the same parents. Even if you don't think she's gorgeous and you don't think he's handsome and you don't like him that much sometimes, he's your brother, you're his sister. You can never sever the connection, even when you're estranged, because you come from one parent. Two parents, the same parents. So Avram says to Sarah, in a time when we're feeling a famine in our lives, when you're feeling in your marriage, sometimes you're lost the love, lost the connection, lost the relationship. Instead of murder, let's resort to the deep, deep connection that can never be severed, a relationship like a brother and a sister, until we can get back to where we're meant to be. This is what the Kabbalah explains, Maisa Ava Siman Labanim, how we can apply this story to ourselves. That sometimes you're feeling the disconnect, the famine in your life. Search deep down for one connection that defies all logic, that defies all boundaries, that can never be severed. That's the connection the Kabbalah calls the brother-sister connection. Born from the same parents, even when you're estranged, even when you're fighting over the will, even when you haven't spoken in a while, it's always there. So when you're feeling that disconnect, find one connection to keep it going, to not allow murder to come to play here, until you can find your way back. And then hopefully with tremendous wealth. So this guy speaking to his friend, he says, ever since we went to this therapist, she gave us the best advice. Our marriage is flourishing. He says, really, really? What did the therapist tell you? He said to take a 3-hour walk each day, and it's working miracles. He says, my wife walks on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 3 hours. Saturday for 3 hours. It's working miracles. So to sum up, and then I want to share a story I just read. I'm sure we'll figure a tie-in. Lech Lecha. Each and every one of us has a journey for our benefit to discover who we are and to reach our Canaan, our Eretz Yisrael, our promised land, and tap in to our talents, energies. And sometimes, yes, we have to push aside genetics, influences, prejudices, to go and release ourselves to journey forth. And knowing that the matriarchs and patriarchs paved the way, started it off for us to make our lives so much easier to be able to do those things. When you have a moment of self-sacrifice, when you have a moment of, when you are proud of something you did, you took a stand, you know that it's because way back, Avram and Sarah took a stand. That's why you can take a stand. Avram and Sarah went down to Egypt, survived a horrible story with Paro, and left for tremendous wealth. And we sometimes also are surrounded by negative influence, by Paros. And yet we come out and we come out wealthier or better. So really we have to see ourselves in the lives of the matriarchs and patriarchs. Because again, the stories could have been omitted from the Torah. God could have said, let's not put that story in, it's too controversial, they won't get it. They'll read it and think it's something else. That's why you need to study the commentaries, Hasidus, Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, to know what really happened here. What's the true story between the lines? If you read just the text, it's very confusing sometimes. And sometimes even misleading. You don't really know what happened. So at the end of the Torah portion, God tells Avram to circumcise himself. Lot ends up in Sodom with the Sodomites, which we'll talk about next week. And good news, Sarah and Abraham are told of God will bless them with a child, because till now, Sarah was not able to conceive. And the story of Hagar and Ishmael we'll discuss next time. And I want to, does anybody have any questions before I end off with the story I heard that I really want to share? It's really a beautiful story to end our week and go into Shabbos. Anybody want to add, say something, contradict, argue? Oh, such a wonderful group. Everybody's so humble.
I find it comforting to think of Abraham and Sarah leading the way for us, as especially Sarah, the mother figure. I find it a little less scary in the world to have them.
I know, it is very comforting to know. As you read it, I kind of never felt close to them. You know what I mean? Now I'm beginning to feel a little closer. And we have them within himself. There's a song from a popular singer called Eighth Day. He says, we all have a little bit of Moses in us. We all have that. We have parts of them in us that give us our energy. So I'm going to tell you the story that I just heard. So this couple were trying to have a child in Spring Valley for many years. And finally, after many years, they gave birth to 5 babies. What is that called?
That's a sextuplet.
Quintuplet.
Quintuplets.
Supporting quintuplets is no easy feat. So they put out an appeal in the community, and one very wealthy woman who happens to be a Holocaust survivor gave a lot of money to help the babies. She's just a very generous person. And she asked one thing, can I just come see them? Of course. So they go, she comes to the house, she cuckoos with the babies, and as she's leaving, she sees on the bureau a picture of a woman, and she faints. And, they call 911, Hatzalah, they revive her, and she tells the following story, that the woman in the picture is the mother of the grandmother of the babies, also a Holocaust survivor. And the woman in the picture saved her life. And she tells the following story, that they ended up in Bergen-Belsen, this elderly woman, and 4 other young girls who ended up there. They became a band. And growing up in religious homes and from homes in Europe, they said, even though we're in Bergen-Belsen, we're going to do as many mitzvahs as possible. We're going to make blessings on the food, and we're going to pray every day. We're going to light Shabbos candles. We're going to try to be as pious as possible in Bergen-Belsen. And that's what they did. And it came Hanukkah, and they saved up a little piece of margarine to make oil, and they took thread from their clothes. And then they needed a potato peel to make a vessel to light the first candle. So they snuck out, and they went to the back of the kitchen to get potato peels. And they were caught, and they were told that the next day they were going to be executed for theft, for stealing a potato peel. They didn't know what to do, and they knew that there was a woman who got preferential treatment by the Nazis in Bergen-Belsen because she was a translator. She knew 6 languages. So when they needed to spy, or they had correspondence and they needed translated, this woman would do it for them. And they gave her preferential treatment. So they thought maybe she can save them. So again, they were told they're going to be executed the next day. They find out that where her bunk was, and they went in and they quietly knock on the door, and there's no answer. So they push the door open, and they see her sitting in the corner, and she had lit a Hanukkah candle, and she was chanting the bracha. They heard her singing, and they caught her off guard, and she turned around, and she said, "Why are you here? You're going to get me killed." And they told her, "No, we wanted to light our menorah, and tomorrow we're going to be executed. Help us." She says, "I can't help you. Leave right now." So they left. They were destitute. What they're going to do? They tried. The next morning, they're about to be taken out to be shot, and they see her in the corner of the camp arguing with the commandant. Looks like she's having a big argument. And the next thing they know, they're released. And 3 days later, the British freed the camp. And they left, and they never saw this woman again. This woman who gave the money to the babies saw the picture of the mother who was the translator. The mother in the picture was the one who saved her life and her 4 friends. So the girl, the mother of the 5 babies, says to her like this. She says, the night before I went into labor, my mother of blessed memory came to me in a dream and said the following word in Yiddish, the following statement. And I didn't understand what it meant till today. Mein Tochterl, my daughter, 5 for 5, which means in English, my daughter, 5 for 5. Five babies, 5 souls, 5 girls she saved in the camps. So it's an unbelievable story, but what does this show us? Maisa avasim and labanim. Whatever you do, creates an energy, actualizes a potential, a spark, anything good you do in the universe. Like the matriarchs and patriarchs, and you never know when that energy will reveal itself in somebody's life and bring forth a miracle, bring forth a blessing, bring forth a change. 5 for 5. So if any lesson we take out from the matriarchs and patriarchs is whatever we do, whatever positive energy we create, you never know. You might see it now, you might never see it. Your great-grandchildren might see it. Hopefully Mashiach will come before. 5 for 5. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns, arguments, debates?
No, you're awesome.
It's a complacent group.
No,
We're mesmerized.
We're in awe of you. Yes, right.
I'm
Thank
looking
you
what
so
I
much.
can do now. I'm looking to see how could I do something good.
You just did.
It was so wonderful. And I have to tell you that in the middle of class, Michael and his fiance came in the room in full dress Halloween costumes. And it took all my power not to crack up. It's funny.
Halloween.
Well, all right, Purim costumes, a little longer.
Yeah, right.
I was sure it was Purim.
Thank you.
Pumpkin
Thank you,
costume.
Freida.
Yes.
No,
Go ahead.
good Shabbos.
Oh, good Shabbos. That's very profound.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos, Frida.
Good
Frida,
Shabbos.
thank you so much.
And may we all see God's blessings in our elections. The main thing is our country should be healthy and safe. And remember, whatever president gets elected, they're not really the president. Almighty God is the president. Keep that in mind, that God runs the world.
Thank you. Bye now. Bye.